Traveling the Vortex. Side Trip.
Hello once again, and welcome to Star Trek 201. I'm Shaun from Traveling the Vortex, the resident Trek geek and expert on the Doctor Who podcast you're probably a little more familiar with. A long time ago, I won't say the rest of it, it was suggested by a couple of our listeners that I kind of walk them through what made Star Trek so great, and the result was Star Trek 101, where I took a look at the original series. That was followed by Star Trek 102, where I took a look at the original series movies. About 5 years have gone by in between bouts, and I thought maybe it's time now to revisit these and continue on with Star Trek 201, which will be my look into Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, unlike the original series, Star Trek The Next Generation had a 7-year time frame to run. And it's just simply too big for me to cover in a half-hour side trip. So I will be tackling these season by season, partly because it's the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, and I felt it was definitely time to dust this idea off, partly because Mel and I have been going back through, and we finally got to our next-gen rewatch, and we've just rewatched these recently, within the last month or so, and so they're all very fresh in my mind, and I thought, well, now's the perfect opportunity to do so. So some quick background information. Star Trek The Next Generation debuted in 1987, coming off the heels of the very successful Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home in theaters. That's the one with the whales. Paramount was sitting on quite the cash cow, and they knew it. And they really, as with most things, the decisions were financially obligated. They wanted more money. There was talk afoot at the studio about making another series or bringing it back to television. But everyone was a little concerned about the aging actors and the skyrocketing salaries, which, for a television series are valid concerns, quite honestly. Roddenberry had been briefly approached about it and basically said no way he wouldn't do it. He had no interest in going back into the grind of day-to-day television, especially considering everything that happened to him during the 60s on the television show. And Paramount was pretty adamant that they didn't want to try and do it without him because they kind of knew the fans would just not have any of it. Eventually, they wore him down and convinced him that they were going to do it without a network. One of the big problems, obviously, that Star Trek had was NBC. And they said, no, we're not going to have that. You won't have any network interference because we're going to go directly into syndication. Syndication basically means that normally you have a production company, say Paramount in this case, who makes the TV show. They actually pay for it, and then they sell the episodes to a network. The network then has to turn around and resell, if you will, the airtime for those episodes. Consequently, the network has a pretty big strong arm in how the show proceeds because it's, representing their brand, it's representing their airtime, it's representing how much money they can get from their advertisements that they're going to be selling those spots for. And so if you do something they don't like, they can refuse to purchase the episode, which then puts the production company in a lot of risk because, well, they're going to pay for it. So, but we won't have any of that, they said, and Roddenberry eventually agreed. Star Trek The Next Generation was never really envisioned to be a retread of the original series. As Roddenberry himself commented, why bother doing something that's already been done? He wanted to do new characters. He wanted to do something that had not been done before with these with this crew, with a new ship. I think it was pretty obvious that it still needed to be called Enterprise from the get-go. But, he even commented we may not have a Vulcan on the ship. And lo and behold, they really didn't, at least not as one of the main characters. The pilot, which was commissioned, Encounter at Farpoint, was originally going to be a 1-hour premiere. That was very strictly adamant from Gene Roddenberry. Paramount wanted a 2-hour premiere. And he really didn't want to do it. He thought the 2 hours was pushing the format into areas that, we've already done this. We do movies. But they wanted something big and splashy. And I'm going to take just a moment to talk about Encounter at Farpoint. Encounter at Farpoint is simultaneously one of the best pilots for a television series ever made and one of the worst. It's a really interesting dichotomy of entertainment. And here's my rationale for that. When you watch Encounter at Farpoint, it is very methodical. It's very economical in a way. We get a lot of scenes that lay out the characters, that describe who they are. We get a lot of scenes of the ship and its abilities and what it can do. And it just pretty much sets the tone for everything that will follow. Unfortunately, it sets that tone so dryly and so clinically, it feels almost like a paint-by-numbers episode that there's not a whole lot of enjoyment to be gotten out of it. I think you can sit and kind of absorb it without really enjoying it. And it's kind of a shame because I think there's a lot of good work, a lot of hard work that went into making this pilot. But as with Star Trek in general, sometimes the pilots just don't work as well as we think they will. It's also, again, interesting to note, if you remember my conversation from last time with Star Trek 102, that Star Trek the Motion Picture was kind of a dry run for Star Trek The Next Generation. There's a lot of very similar themes, a lot of very similar emotions, a lot of very similar tonal palettes, even down to the colors of the ship being very kind of a neutral, that are in use now. And so Roddenberry went back to that well to make sure that he had, ultimately what he was trying to get after the first time. In Star Trek The Motion Picture, the first officer is Commander William Decker. In The Next Generation, it's Commander William Riker. Decker had a liaison, former affair, love of his life with the ship's counselor, Lieutenant Ilea, who was an empath, she was a navigator in the motion picture. Riker had a previous relationship with the show's counselor, Deanna Troi, who was an empath. The design of the ship, the octagonal corridors, the look of the engineering, even the uniforms kind of going back to jumpsuits is very similar. So it's interesting to see that, 20 years later they tried, or 10 years later they did it again and got exactly what they needed. Star Trek The Next Generation has a different feel than Star Trek. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still Star Trek, but it's not the swashbuckling adventure, some 60s era Star Trek that the original series is. It's grown up a bit. It's you have to also keep in mind, in a way, that the time period in which these were manufactured. Star Trek, as much as I love it, is very much a product of the 60s. Star Trek The Next Generation is very much a product of the late 80s, early 90s. There's different sensibilities and different storytelling techniques. And one of the ones that came up recently that we actually discussed amongst us as a family after watching the episode, it had a kind of a similar problem. It wasn't an exact remake of an original series episode. And of course, now that I've started the story, I for the life of me cannot remember which one it was. But it had a similar problem. And we spent, I don't know, probably a good half hour discussing the various pros and cons of how that particular issue was handled within the confines of the show and maybe what should have been done differently. It was a prime directive problem, I can tell you that. And the crew's response and reactions to it versus, what Kirk would have done versus what even in the new series, or the new movies, the Kelvin timeline with Into Darkness, what Kirk does in that particular instance versus what Picard and company do here in the Next Gen time frame. So it's really kind of interesting. I think it's a very thought-provoking show, but not in a bad way. There's still enough fisticuffs and phaser fights for for everybody to get behind and get something to enjoy. But it does move at a different speed. In a way, it's a little bit like classic and New Who. It just moves at a different pace, and so you kind of have to be aware of that going into it. The first season of Next Gen is, what's a good word? Stodgy, maybe? No, that's not a good word for it. Don't get me wrong, it's entertaining. It's worth your time. But the show's not quite fully cooked yet. Most of the pieces are there. Most of the characterization is to come. So a lot of times you'll have a character maybe doing something that's not quite right. They really didn't have much for Worf Worf. Didn't really have much for Worf to do in the first season, despite the big, shocking announcement that we're going to have a Klingon on the bridge, because we're now allies with the Klingon Empire. Putting a Klingon on the bridge took a couple of years for them to really start to delve into the nuances and the mysteries of the race and his species, and what Klingons are all about, and how this particular Klingon would go about integrating himself into Federation society. So it's a little weird because it almost feels like stunt casting. It feels like, hey, look, here's a Klingon, but nothing is done with him. Tasha Yar, the original security chief, played by Denise Crosby. Tasha is an interesting character. Denise is a very nice woman. I've met her, and she's an absolute joy. I think all the way around, Tasha was kind of a misstep. I didn't like her character, and I didn't like Crosby's portrayal of her character. And it was difficult at best, in a way, to deal with some of her episodes and some of the scenarios. She makes the best of it, but even Crosby herself said that, she realized she was going to be in this for the long haul, standing on the bridge saying hailing frequencies open, hailing frequencies closed, which is her reason for leaving. There's some internet scuttlebutt that's not the way that went down, but I believe those are just rumors. I won't go into the whys. You can look that up yourself if you're really interested. So she does wind up leaving toward the end of the first season. Geordi is wearing a red shirt. He's not chief engineer. In fact, we get a revolving door of chief engineers. I'm not quite sure why. It feels very unsettled. Like you're really not sure, was this something they purposely meant to do, knowing that we were going to promote Geordi to engineer later? Or if they just hadn't settled on that position because they didn't think it was important the way that Scotty was important. And then there's Data. Data obviously is, the android character of the group. And he was meant to be the Mr. Spock of the Next Generation. He was meant to be the emotionalist character trying to find his humanity. And Brent Spiner plays him with wonderful aplomb. He is one of the best things about the show. Patrick Stewart, of course, is wonderful. Jonathan Frakes. The entire cast is just very well put together and conceived. And one of the few times where they can catch lightning in a bottle. Next Gen works. It's not Star Trek, but it is Star Trek. It holds true to the core values of the show, while very much giving us a different look, a different atmosphere, a different attitude of people that are put in similar situations. And that's one of the best things about it. It is, now I say similar situations, there are a handful of episodes that are pretty much direct rip-offs of episodes that were done. I suppose homage is the best way to put it. I'm looking at you, The Naked Now, where the crew gets drunk. It's like, we've already done this. But I think for the most part, they're done tongue planted in cheek, and they're meant to be enjoyable for what they are. So the first season is not horrible. I found myself coming away from it with the rewatch that, I actually liked it better than I remembered. That there were episodes that I went into kind of going, I don't remember this one at all. And then as it started to unfold, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember this one. But yet I was still engaged and surprised by it. And I think that's kind of a really remarkable thing, because there's a lot of season 1 episodes. Again, this came out in 1987. And then eventually showed up on DVD, I want to say sometime around 1995 was when those sets started to come out and be made available. Now, it was available in reruns, obviously because of the wonders of syndication. But for me owning a copy, it was probably 95 before I owned some of these episodes. And I had never gone back and completely rewatched them from start to finish. I would pick one episode here or one episode there. And very rarely did those episodes come from the first season. So this is my first time since 87 going back and really devoting the time to them. And they stand up, which was something that I thought was surprising and quite enjoyable to see that they're still as engaging as they were. With the original series, the Star Trek 101, I also offered up my picks for the top 10 episodes of the series, ones that maybe a new viewer of Star Trek Star Trek would be interested in. I don't think I can do that with Next Gen, simply because 7 seasons, 10 episodes doesn't seem fair, but nor do I want to try and pick out 10 episodes from season 1, because that's just insane. So I've narrowed it down to 5. And these are the 5 episodes that are probably my favorites out of season 1. These are I've tried to balance this a little bit with 5 episodes you really ought to watch, as well as 5 that happen to be among my favorites. So you get a little bit of both. And I'll work backwards so that, again, there's a little bit of suspense, and maybe some fans will agree with me, and maybe some of them won't. It's the glory of fan lists, right? So coming in at number 5, The Battle is an episode where the Ferengi bring Picard's old starship, the Stargazer. They have founded a derelict wreck, and they contact the Enterprise and bring it to him and basically say, hey, look what we found. And Picard's quite surprised and astonished that the Stargazer still exists. Through the backstory, we learn that it was nearly destroyed, thought destroyed, in what is known as the Battle of Maxima, or Maxia. The Battle of Maxia. And Picard and some of his crew escaped, and many did not. And it was a battle with the Ferengi. Now, the Ferengi were meant to be kind of the big bads for the new show. They were really meant to be this generation. I mean, we can't fight the Klingons anymore because, obviously, we've made peace with them. And there was a Romulan plot set up that they wanted the Romulans to be involved, and they are. But sparingly. The Romulans have kind of been on hiatus for the last 70 years and very reclusive, and so we're slowly going to get introduced to them as the series progresses. But the Ferengi were meant to be the come-out-of-the-gate bad guys. They're very materialistic, they're very greedy, and unfortunately they just didn't work on Next Gen. They came across rather comical. They were not a threat. They were not scary. They were technologically very much an equal match, if not superior, to the Enterprise. But for some reason, it just never gelled. And their first appearance is laughable. This is their second appearance, and it's done much better. The Ferengi captain is, we learned, basically this is all of personal vendetta against Picard, who he calls the hero of Maxia. And he has placed a thought control device on the ship that is going to force Picard to reenact that battle against his will, but he will be duped into doing it and attack the Enterprise instead. It's a very well done episode. It has a lot of throwbacks to the original series, specifically the movie eras, with the styling of the ship, the Stargazer Bridge. And it's just, it's got a phenomenal performance by Patrick Stewart. It's a very, very good, very well done episode. And in a lot of ways kind of redeems, at least partially, those aspects of the Ferengi that I think were very much lacking in their first appearance. Coming in at number 4 for me on this list of episodes you probably should see, The Neutral Zone. Now, The Neutral Zone is an interesting one. It's one of those that has very firmly established what would become the Next Gen template. And the Next Gen template, if you look at most of the stories throughout Next Generation, there are 2 plots. There's an A plot and a B plot. And while this is going on, this is also going on. And they cut back and forth between the 2 plots. You get your 5 commercial breaks and the show's over. Both of them usually wind up resolving, or at least have a hand in. Frequently, the B plot will wind up being the actual resolution for the A plot, or vice versa. The Neutral Zone is the Enterprise picks up a probe that was launched from Earth many years ago with cryogenic sleepers on it. And some of you are going, oh my God, they did con. No, they didn't do con. These were people who were frozen and basically waiting for a cure for whatever ailment or disease they had, launched into space and kind of forgotten about. They took a Buck Rogers trajectory and woke up 300 years later, when the Enterprise rescued them, and their reintegration into society. And you kind of get a couple of different looks. There is a cowboy, he's a country and western singer who apparently was a big deal at the time that he went under. And his very good-natured, lackadaisical, easygoing attitude is, everything's going to be okay. There is an investment banker who doesn't understand that this is the 24th century and that money has pretty much been abolished, and that his lawyers don't exist, and his empire is gone, and everybody who would care about such a thing has evolved beyond that. And then you get the mom who was frozen out of some, not something she asked for, but out of some strange dedication that her husband had to her in order to see her survive beyond him, and is just kind of struggling to reconnect with anybody. And there's some. It sounds a little corny, but for me, it's got some really nice parallels. There's something to identify with these people, and they get to be kind of our eyes and ears into this 24th century and how we would maybe react to it. The A plot deals with Federation outposts along the neutral zone that have disappeared, and every time we come to one, we find they've just basically been wiped off the face of the planet. And it's strongly suspected that the Romulans are involved in that. So there's the meat of the story is the final reveal of the Romulan threat, and it comes in the last episode of the season. So that's something that's a little different. Number 3 on my top list for this season, Justice. Now, if you've seen Next Generation, this is fondly remembered as the one where nobody wore any clothes. The Enterprise encounters a very innocent, childlike almost race on a garden planet. It's pretty much Eden. It's a paradise. Everything is wonderful and lovely, and they have very few inhibitions, and everything is very sensual and innocent. Until in what appears to be an innocent game of catch, Wesley Crusher winds up. He falls on top of a flower and crushes it to bejesus. But unfortunately, it's in a designated white zone, which means the penalty is death. They have very absolute rules on this planet, and that's how they've managed to keep the peace without a big judicial system and laws and everything. The laws are very set, and the laws are handed down to them by God, or at least what they perceive to be God. It's actually an entity in orbit over the planet. And while the story can be a little cornball, I think the themes are fantastic. The idea of a superior power watching over its progeny and attacking the Enterprise and trying to warn them away from it because it doesn't want them to kind of ruin the experiment. And also the idea that, one of these people winds up going up to the ship and seeing God and what that does to them. And then the whole, is this a fair ruling? Is this a fair law when you have something that's set in absolute terms? Don't do this or else. And it doesn't matter what this is. It doesn't matter the severity of it. It doesn't matter, they would have the same punishment for murder as they do crushing a flower. Is that fair? And then on top of all that, there's the Prime Directive to deal with. Do we allow Wesley to be eliminated? Or do we save him and violate the Prime Directive? It's our most important rule for the Federation and for Starfleet. I think these are wonderful themes. And as a young man in 1987, the fact that they didn't wear any clothes was kind of an added bonus. Not going to lie. Number 2, conspiracy. Oh, conspiracy. Why, oh, why, oh, why? So, Picard gets a message from a couple of other friends, Starfleet captains of other vessels, and he has a clandestine meeting out on the Outer Rim that they talk him into coming to, and basically give him a bunch of stories about strange orders being passed down from Starfleet and contradictory terms and things that shouldn't be happening are happening. And has he noticed anything strange? And it's apparently been going on for months. Picard thinks that, you guys are nuts. He has Data look into it, and Data can corroborate the story. He finds that there have been some very odd things happening at Starfleet Command, and that perhaps something is afoot Shortly after that, it's one of the captains who warned him, his entire starship explodes, winds up destroyed. Picard, resolving to get to the bottom of this, flies home to Earth to find out what is going on. Now, I'm going to sound the spoiler warning here, even though normally I wouldn't give away the ending of this, but this is the tragedy of conspiracy. So, spoilers if you haven't seen it. I'm going to spoil the ending of this one. They arrive on Earth and discover that much of Starfleet's high command has been infected with an intelligent insect parasite that is living within them, and it has taken them over via mind control and forcing them to shuffle these ships around and make these erratic decisions in order to cement their hold and pave the way for the eventual invasion force. Now, it won't be an invasion force of like actual, War of the Worlds laser guns and spaceships, but it will be just this mass migration of insects that will come in and not be stopped, and they will consume and take over all of these other minds. And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. The idea of it, the concept, the way it's portrayed, the music, the direction, everything about this episode is fantastic. And it ends with Picard and company saving the day and destroying the mother insect and, basically wiping out the rest of the brood because of the destruction of the leader. And at the very last, one of the last scenes is they send a signal into space right as they're destroyed. And the last scene is on the Enterprise, and Picard gets word that this signal that was sent, they can't decipher it, but it was beamed into deep space, into a section of the galaxy that has remained unexplored. And the final shot is the Enterprise against the star background, heading off to whatever their next adventure is going to be, and just this beep 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 floating off into the ether. It is bone-chilling, because you know that this is just the setup for something greater. The tragedy of conspiracy is they never came back to the story. In all of the episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, in Deep Space Nine, in Voyager, in all of the books, in all of the ancillary materials, that plot thread never once gets picked up again. And I bang my head against the wall. It keeps me awake at night going, why didn't you do something else with this? It's absolutely maddening. It is a perfect episode, and it's so amazing and so great and so Star Trek. And then we never get a sequel, and so deserving of one. Oh, the tragedy of conspiracy. But believe it or not, that's my number 2 pick. Number 1, and I think most fans would agree with this, The Big Goodbye. The Big Goodbye was the holodeck episode. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, the holodeck is the recreation area on the ship. Basically, it's a big room with some yellow lines painted on the walls, and the ship is programmed through their holographic library to make the room into anything you need. You want a restaurant on the beach? We got that. You want to stand on a fragment of asteroid and stare into deep space? We got that. You want a junket from the Chinese Sea at the turn of the century in 1899 on New Year's Eve with fireworks? Yeah, we got that. It can literally be programmed for anything. Picard's particular poison, if you will, is a series of novels, Dixon Hill, who is a hard-boiled film noir detective story. And the holodeck is programmed with all of these stories, and he enters into San Francisco and basically gets to play out a very hard-boiled film noir. And it's equal parts the Maltese Falcon, and it's beyond wonderful. It won both a Hugo and a Nebula for outstanding science fiction, and it's well-deserved. because in addition to being fun and cool and, hey, look what they did here, and it's an excuse for them to play dress up and do a period piece without time travel, which is kind of a nifty concept in and of itself. It also deals with a little weightier things when one of the holodeck characters, they're basically told, you are a holodeck creation, and one of them asks, will my family still be waiting for me when you leave? And suddenly you begin to question whether or not this is a good technology, because we can create these beings basically out of thin air, and it's a hologram. It's a hologram with a force field that feels solid. So when you look at them and touch them, you feel a human being, and you have this conversation with a human being, and yet it's all programming. But they can't leave the room because they're an image. But are they aware that they're an image? Well, this particular one became aware that he was an image and then began to question things. And that, to me, is the best science fiction. That is when sci-fi and Star Trek in particular are at their best, when they ask those kinds of questions that leave you going, and you have 30-minute discussions with the family afterward. The Big Goodbye is a lot of fun, and it almost could be one of those two-parters that it feels like, for as good as it is, maybe they didn't quite get enough in, that they could have had a little bit more playtime with it. But, on the other hand, it's also pretty perfect. For season 1 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, there aren't necessarily many standouts. I kind of had a problem, it was a challenge to really put together a top 5. Now, I would give honorable mentions, since it's not just a favorites list, but ones that you should watch. The Arsenal of Freedom is a pretty solid one, about a planet that needs to be quarantined because they've got these super weapons that will kill you. I think Where No One Has Gone Before, where the ship goes through an interesting engine experiment that catapults them to the farthest reaches of unknown space into a realm where thought prevails, is where we're going. And the aforementioned Encounter at Farpoint. Obviously, you kind of need to start at the beginning if this is a series that you're interested in, just so that you can kind of get a handle on it, despite the clunky clinical nature that Encounter at Farpoint possesses itself. It also, Encounter at Farpoint also sets up Q, who, in my mind, is kind of the big ranging villain of the piece. Wonderfully played by John Delancey. And the characterization of Q and the way Delancey plays him is very much worth sitting through some of the cringeworthy 80s sci-fi TV setup. But they get there. Like I said, the season 1, it was a bit of a struggle to come up with 5 outstanding episodes, but the ones that are outstanding, I think, are very, very outstanding. And I think fandom would agree with that. That there's a handful of nuggets that are just really, really good. The majority of them are decent enough to watch. There's a couple of stinkers in there, but not. And we won't talk about Skin of Evil. But it's not gouge your eyeballs out bad television. Even when it's bad, it's still Star Trek. So that is definitely something to contend with. That's going to end it. That's going to wrap it up for me for Star Trek 201 in this look at season 1. I will come back and give you another side trip with my thoughts on season 2 once Mel and I have finished it, and it's a little fresher in my mind. And I look forward to working my way through these and kind of delivering a little more Star Trek, a little more bang for your buck, as it were. As always, thank you so much to everybody for listening and for supporting our podcast. If you are not a regular listener to our Doctor Who podcast, Traveling the Vortex, we would very much like you to be. The regular podcast is Doctor Who in nature, and we tend to tangent a little bit, but we've reined it in, I think, quite a bit since then, at least since the early days. You can find that at travelingthevortex.com. Of course, we're on all the forms of social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We have a Goodreads book club. Thank you so much to the ladies for administering that. So there's a lot of different avenues out there. A YouTube channel that you can consume stuff we put out. If you really, really enjoyed this, you can support us on Patreon. those are donations are always welcome and go right back into our podcast. And if you are currently a Patreon supporter, we cannot thank you enough, because it really means something to know that people will sit there and listen to me talk. If you are so inclined, you can send feedback either through the Traveling the Vortex page, which is feedback@travelingthevortex.com, or you can send it to me directly. I am Shaun, S-H-A-U-N, at travelingthevortex.com. You can also reach me on Twitter, where I am at VortexShaun. I'm happy to discuss anything that you would like in regards to what we've covered here today. That's going to wrap it up here. Again, this is Shaun from Traveling the Vortex, thanking you very much and signing off for this side trip.